Well, let's begin with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity to study science and Scripture. I pray that your Holy Spirit would guide us. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to talk about the gut-brain connection to dementia and diabetes. Now, I don't want you to think that the gut-brain is the only aspect of dementia. It is an aspect of dementia, so we're touching on that. There are other lifestyle factors that are extremely important for avoiding dementia, like regular exercise is extremely important. Something like sleep apnea. I'm guessing many of you know what that is. It's where you're sleeping at night and you stop breathing for a time period. And sleep apnea is a massive factor when it comes to dementia. What can happen is, depending on how severe your sleep apnea is, you could be 50 times an hour stop breathing, and so if you've ever heard somebody in that situation, it's a horrible sound, and they often have night terrors, nightmares that are just overwhelming, where their worst memories of life come back to them. But if you have sleep apnea, I would really suggest you have a sleep study done and that you get a CPAP machine. And this is the thing, I know many people try CPAPs and they say, I hate it, I didn't like it. You have to learn how to use it, because often the medical professionals don't really tell you how to use it. And so it is a horrible experience if you don't know how to use it. But if somebody teaches you how to use it properly, and if you can get the right either mask or the cannula, the nasal mask, if you can get the right one that works for you, you'll often feel. I just had somebody call me yesterday, and they just said their life's been changed because they tried CPAP in the past, didn't work. Then the new guy taught him how to use it, and now he feels like a different person. So
because you have to make some adjustments on it just to get it right where you're comfortable.
Yes, and so yes, not everybody needs a CPAP, obviously, but if you have dementia, not dementia, if you have sleep apnea, rather, that's something to consider so that you could avoid potentially having dementia. There's other reasons for dementia, like toxicity. Mold. Mold is a potential causative factor for dementia also. We do a whole presentation where we go through the research on the impact of mold on human health. That can be a massively negative impact for memory. So these are things to consider. These are just a few different things, but we're mainly going to talk a bit about the gut-brain connection to dementia and diabetes. Yes, vitamin D levels. You want adequate vitamin D levels. Yes, inflammation in the body is also another major causative factor. If you're eating an inflammatory diet, that is something that can also raise rates of dementia.
And toxic stuff.
What's that?
Toxins.
Yes, toxins in general. That could be high levels of mercury, any kind of heavy metal, any of these kinds of things, toxicity. And once again, mold is also a toxin. If you have mold in your house, and you know that you do, if there's a musty smell, that is a sign that mildew is a form of mold. So if there is a musty smell, if you got mold in the bathroom or leaky ceiling, you want to be careful you want to figure out how to get that fixed, and you want to have somebody come in and deal with that with a respirator, because it can give you arthritis. Some people think they just have arthritis, but it's actually a mold reaction. They're living with a inflammatory joint disease because of mold. I don't mean everybody, but that is one of the potential factors.
And then the inflammation in the brain too from the mold. Am I on?
I'm not sure. Yeah, it is. Here, maybe we'll shove it toward your mouth a little. There we go. Okay. All right, so on with our actual slides here. Dementia and Alzheimer's are some of the most dreaded diseases. Over 10% of the population over 65, should be a space there, have Alzheimer's, and 33, basically a third of people over 85 have Alzheimer's or dementia. So the older you get, the higher likelihood it is that you will come down with dementia or Alzheimer's. So some of the things we just mentioned, by not having mold or not eating an inflammatory diet, a lot of refined grains, a lot of white bread, those can be, for some people, can be inflammatory. Junk food in general, a bunch of sugar is inflammatory. Now, we're not talking about sugar that is in an apple. An apple is not going to be inflammatory, but if you're having refined sugar, that is inflammatory. But you can see, I mean, a third of people 85 or above end up coming down with either dementia or Alzheimer's. So we've talked about some of the potential causes. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes 7:25, I applied mine heart to know and to search and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things. So one of the important things is to seek out the cause. It is not just a destiny to have Alzheimer's. Sure, there could be a genetic component. There's a saying. What is the saying? Do you know?
About the
Genetics.
Genetics load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Yeah.
So many diseases, like for instance, type 2 diabetes, someone can think, we worked with a man, oh, my grandma has it, just thinking it was his destiny too. And we went and we stayed with him. We've done this in the past. We've stayed with people in their homes, help them reverse their diabetes, help them change their diet. And one of the fellows we were working with, he just figured it was his destiny. Grandma had it, so he has it. And it took 5 days of changing his diet to get his blood sugar in the normal range. Just 5 days. Mm-hmm. Not everybody is that fast. Sometimes it'll take a few weeks. Sometimes it might take a few months, but very few people actually will it take a few months. Most people, by a serious change, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, serious change to the diet can stabilize their blood sugar in relatively short order. But so we want to find the reason of things. Solomon, one of the wisest men, probably the wisest men, at least of his generation, one of the wisest men ever, he said, I would seek out wisdom and the reason of things. To have a scientific understanding, we want to seek out the reason of things. We see in Job chapter 29, verse 16.
It says, and the cause which I knew not, I searched out. And so it's important that we search these things out and not just say, well, it is what it is. It doesn't matter.
And if you don't want to try, you don't have to. Remember, we've talked about the fact you have autonomy. If you just say, well, I just want to live this lifestyle no matter what happens to me, nobody's going to force you to change. Mm-hmm. But I figure if you come to a seminar like this, and you had something happening, you'd probably say, man, if I could change it, I'm going to do it. If I could keep my cognition into my elderly years, I'll do everything I can to do that. And so you have that autonomy.
What is disease? Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of laws of health. There's certain laws of health that we have in our bodies, right? In case of sickness, the cause, again, we're talking about the cause, should be ascertained. The cause should be figured out. Unhealthful conditions should be changed, wrongful habits corrected, then nature is to be assisted in her effort to expel impurities and to reestablish right conditions in the system. This is a beautiful definition of what disease is, because it's what your body's always doing, right? It's looking to fix things. And so when you see something's wrong, you have to think, why is my body reacting like this? What conditions? He was talking about mold earlier, that mold can cause arthritic pain, right? And so a lot of times you think, oh, I just have arthritis. It's in the family.
And by the way, there's other factors in arthritis too. That's right. Just one potential, but go ahead.
But it could be a factor. And so you look into the cause and figure out, you're in a humid area, right? And so your homes could be prone to having mold. And so then, like he said, you would ascertain the cause and then figure out how to fix it. And so call somebody in, a professional that would take care of it so you don't hurt yourself, because we've done that, trying to do it by ourselves, and then you just get a big reaction to mold when you do something like that. So then you've expelled it from your environment, but then you want to expel it from the body. And then you figure out, okay, how can I detox from this? So that's
so just in case you want to learn about how to help your body with mold, the second to newest video, not the newest video, but the one before the newest video on my YouTube channel, Health and Homestead. I go into the research on mold, what it can do to the human body, and the scientific studies on some natural remedies that you can do to help the body to detoxify from that. So once again, disease is an effort of nature. When you have a disease, your body is telling you something is wrong. It's telling you, hey, it's fighting when you have pains or aches or you're losing your memory. There is a reason. There is a cause. And if we can remove the cause, in most cases, you can avoid keeping that disease for the rest of your life. And one of the aspects of dementia or Alzheimer's is you have what is called atrophy of the brain. The brain literally begins to deteriorate and it gets smaller and smaller. So you're losing memories not only in your mind, you're physically losing memories, right? Your brain is, as the researchers call it, it begins to atrophy. But I want to talk about something called lacunar strokes. A study reported in the American Diabetes Association Diabetes Care looking at diabetes, prediabetes, and non-diabetics. It scanned their brains. Participants ranged in age from 40 to 75, and they were looking for lacunar infarcts, which are acute strokes where an artery has been blocked in the white matter of the brain. And they discovered that 61% of pre-diabetics had these lacunar infarcts or these strokes in their brain, and 67% of diabetics. So these are not massive strokes where you may not even know that you've had them. They're these minor strokes that have taken place in your brain. But look at those statistics. Pre-diabetic, because many people think, oh, I'm just a pre-diabetic, so that's not so bad. But notice that 61% of pre-diabetics have these lacunar infarcts or these lacunar strokes, and 67%, that's 2 out of 3 people that are diabetic. It's not that far off. Mm-hmm. So the good news is you can reverse both type 2 and pre-diabetes in the vast majority of people. And researchers have looked at people, actually that's the same thing. Oh yeah, researchers have looked at people with both prediabetes and diabetes and have found both groups have cognitive impairment. Their memory is not as sharp when they have either prediabetes or diabetes, and it is worse in those who are full-blown diabetics. So that's something to consider. And something simple, we could call this a gut-brain connection, but this is not what researchers think when they think of a gut-brain connection. But what is it?
Dementia and your waist size. According to the American Academy of Neurology, those who had larger waistlines in their 40s have higher chances of dementia in their 70s. Those who have a larger waist in their 40s and are overweight have 2.3 times greater risk of dementia. So this is pretty significant in terms of your chances of having diabetes in terms of like your waistline. So it's not just, again, it's not a cosmetic thing that we're worried about. We're more worried about our brains, right? Because this is where your happiness takes place, right? This is where you enjoy life. It's in your brain.
It's where you connect with people.
It's where you connect with people. And so that's why it's important to take care of our bodies, because our body is what houses this brain, right? And so if you take care of your body, you'll take care of your brain.
Well, diabetes and dementia. According to JAMA, that's the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, blood sugar issues related to diabetes can increase rates of dementia. But dementia can also exacerbate blood sugar issues and can cause a vicious cycle. So having blood sugar spikes and the corresponding often blood sugar drops where you drop into a hypoglycemic, that means too low blood sugar, both of these things can be detrimental to the brain. And we're going to talk more about that. But researchers call Alzheimer's, they now call it type 3 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes. You say, well, I don't know what type 1 and 2 are. Well, you're going to find out. Tonight, it's going to make sense to you what diabetes is. Because even if you may already have diabetes, but often people, you try to figure out your blood sugar and this and that, but I think you'll come to an understanding tonight of how blood sugar works. We're going to go through the physiology of that in a way that I think most all of you can clearly understand. And now, we mentioned in one of the other talks, the gut-brain connection talk specifically last week, Wednesday, I believe, or was it Thursday?
Thursday.
Thursday, thank you. That we talked about this, the first study in all of recorded history, that researchers have looked back through human history to try to find what's the oldest study, and they came to the conclusion that Daniel chapter 1 is the oldest study in all of recorded history. So Daniel goes on a plant-based diet. It says in Daniel 1 verse 12, "Test your servants, I beg you, for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink." So Daniel and his friends were a part of the first scientific experiment that researchers have ever been able to find. They went on a plant-based diet for 10 days, and what they noticed was that it impacted their cognition. And then we showed you a experience in a school where they did this with students who were troubled teens, and they changed their diets, and it changed not only their educational abilities, their scholastic abilities, but it also changed their character. And so, quite fascinating. But they've done a modern study replicating the Daniel study in Daniel chapter 1, and they called this study the Daniel fast. It's not actually a fast, but Fadia, why don't you tell us about it?
So they had 43 people, and they were put on a diet similar to the one found in Daniel chapter 1. They ate a higher amount of carbs on the diet and less protein.
But maybe you could explain.
So the higher amount of carbs, it's not like junk food carbs. You know, today people...
Not candy bars,
right.
Not potato chips, not those kind of things.
But whole foods, you know, where the fiber has not been stripped from the food. And
whole grains,
right.
You know...
like brown rice and whole grain bread, you know, whole wheat bread. And instead of having potato chips, you would have potatoes, things like that. So they had them do that, and then also less protein. During the diet, they had lower blood sugar and blood lipid levels.
It's like lower cholesterol.
So what people think of a high-carb diet is not actually true. If you do a high refined carb diet, yeah, maybe you'd have these blood sugar issues. But if you do a whole carb diet, you will not have these blood sugar issues. But we're going to explain this a little more, because there's one thing that people do with the carbs that could cause diabetes. And we're going to get into that to understand it a little bit more. And they were not diabetics, but ended up showing less insulin resistance.
You're going to find out what insulin is and insulin resistance in a moment. So if you don't understand that, don't worry, we'll get into that. And here's the thing about diabetes. Diabetics are twice as likely to have depression compared to non-diabetics. Same thing with heart disease. That people with heart disease are about twice as likely to have depression. And so these health issues don't only affect your physical health, they affect your mental health.
So the man that Chad mentioned earlier that we went and stayed with, and we helped him with his diabetes, when he got to the 5th morning, his diabetes, like his blood sugars were in the normal range. Well, guess what else changed after the 5th day? His depression.
His depression went away.
He was just happy.
Amazing.
He was just absolutely, because he was coming to the meals at first audibly grunting. Like, like that's how he would come and sit at the meal, and just would drag his feet, not enjoying it at all. And we kept telling him, don't worry, it'll change.
Your taste buds will change.
Your taste buds will change. And we told him how some lifestyle centers, when you go, people are like, ooh, you know, not liking it the first week. And then the second week, they're like, you must have a new cook in there. Nope, same chef. No, I really think you have a new cook in there. Nope, it's the same food, same chef. Your taste buds change. I promise you. So we told this man this just to encourage him, like, keep going forward, it'll come. And like we said, by the 5th morning, his depression lifted, and he was thanking us for the food.
He's like, oh, that was good, thank you.
And then his wife noticed, she's like, I think you've been depressed. Because, you know, it happens gradually, so you as a family don't always notice when things are happening. But she's like, you were depressed. And he was sleeping all day. His toes were going black. That's why we were working with him. But praise the Lord, he still has his toes to this day.
He wouldn't have if he wouldn't have been able to reverse it.
Yeah.
The Bible says in Deuteronomy 6:24, the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes. God gave all kinds of regulations in the Bible, and it says they're for our good always. that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. The principles of health are found in the Word of God. And so we'll look at a little statistics on diabetes.
It's the 7th leading cause of death in the U.S. So that's pretty significant that one, issue causes that much death. Diabetics spend over 2 times as much on healthcare. Both pre-diabetics and diabetics are factors, or pre-diabetes and diabetes are factors in strokes, heart attack, and hypertension. Around 65% of people with diabetes end up with a stroke or heart attack. That's pretty significant. Diabetes is the foremost cause of blindness, kidney failure, and amputations. And these are non-accident amputations. So that's pretty significant. My dad ended up having all these issues. He had a above-the-knee amputation. He was a diabetic. And eventually he had strokes, which caused blindness. But he was also having blindness because, we'll get to some of that, and I'll explain a little more about what happens with the blindness.
Well, let's talk about genes and type 1 and type 2, and in a moment we'll explain what the difference between type 1 and type 2. Identical twins have the same genes. They literally have the same genetics. When one twin has type 1 diabetes, the other has less than a 40% chance of having diabetes, type 1. So, meaning it is a genetic component. There is a genetic component, no question. But notice, if it was 100% the genes were forcing you to have it, then each of them would both have it. They'd either have it or not have it. But the fact that you could have the identical genes and one of you come down with it and one of you not tells you there's also an environmental factor. And so but that is not the case when it comes to type 2 diabetes. Well, it is kind of the same. There is a genetic component also, but the good thing with type 2, you can reverse that you'll see, in the vast majority of the cases, but not if you believe the American Diabetes Association. They say there is no cure for diabetes, but it can be managed. The fact is, they are wrong. It happens all the time. Mm-hmm. I went and spoke at a health center this past weekend. I went up to, it's called Uchee Pines Health Center up in southern Alabama. So I flew up there and spoke they had a continuing medical education conference going on. So I spoke for that. They have people coming, probably every month they have people fully reversing their type 2 diabetes there. It is it's very reversible. Dr. Dean Ornish, one of the top medical professionals in the United States, Dean Ornish says that by changing diet and lifestyle, 95% of people can reverse their type 2 diabetes. 95%. Dr. John McDougall says 100% of them can. So it's somewhere between 95 to 100%.
And some people might think are you sure about that? In their practice, that's what they're seeing, right? With what they help their patients do, they see this reversal. These are their stats. And
so what do we mean reversal? That means getting off of all medication and having normal blood sugar levels. That's what we mean by reversal. So people in institutions that have helped people reverse type 2 diabetes are Dr. John McDougall, Dr. Joel Furman, Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Neil Barnard, and Adventist Health Centers retreats across America. I'm not talking as much about the hospitals, but these Adventist health retreats across the country, really across the world. But Joel Furman, he suggests, this is something kind of important here, that with exercise and an optimal diet, you can anticipate generally within the first week, medications are cut by 50%. And within a month, you continue decreasing by about 6 months, you're cutting nearly every medication. And this is why you have to be in touch with your doctor. Your blood sugars could drop dangerously low if you're not working with a doctor. And especially if you're a diabetic and you're not on any medication, you don't have to worry about your blood sugar dropping too low with a dietary change. The danger is if you're on insulin or if you're on certain medications that for diabetes that could push your blood sugar too low. If you're just on metformin will not push your blood sugar too low that you would die of a diabetic coma from dropping your blood sugar. So metformin doesn't push it too low, but some of the other medications can, insulin being one of them.
And that's why you need to be in contact with your doctor as you're making these changes, because you don't want to get yourself into a situation where your blood sugar goes way too low.
Yeah. And we want to explain a little bit about how diabetes works so that you can understand it a little bit. So this is honey. And what happens is when we eat a meal that is filled with a bunch of refined carbohydrates, things that have white sugar in them, that means drinking soda with sugar, high fructose corn syrup, or candy bars, or cakes and pastries and things that have a lot of refined carbohydrates. As you eat them, they go into your stomach, you begin to break them down, and they send a simple sugar that researchers call glucose into the bloodstream. And as they do that, you have a protein in your red blood cells. It'd be kind of like if I came over, I wouldn't do this, but if I came over here with a big bucket of honey and I came and dumped it on you, well, it's going to get sticky, right? I mean, it would stick all over you. You wouldn't appreciate that, obviously. But as it goes through your blood vessels, it does the same thing. It starts to stick to the sides of the arteries. It sticks to the red blood cells. And they have a protein in them that called hemoglobin that it ends up sticking on. And researchers can look at those red blood cells, and there's a test called the hemoglobin A1C test. We're going to talk about that in a moment, where they can look at how much sugar is coated on that cell. Yeah, on the red blood cell, specifically on the hemoglobin. And they give you a number that will tell you if you're a diabetic, and we'll get to that in a moment. So how do we Oh, and by the way, as that sugar goes all through your system, as it coats the blood vessels, it can damage the blood vessels. It can damage the nerves in your eyes, your fingers, your toes, all over your body. It begins to damage the nerves, and you end up getting potentially something called neuropathy. But we'll tell you more about neuropathy in a moment. But first, let's talk about diagnosing type 2 diabetes. And we just talked about the A1C. Hemoglobin. Mm-hmm. And hemoglobin, there's a test called the hemoglobin A1C test. So if you've ever had, this is the way it works. A normal person is going to have, their number will come back 5.7 or below. A normal person will have that. Mine, I think last I checked, was about a 4.7. So it's in a very healthy number. If you're a pre-diabetic, it'll come back between 5.7 and 6.5. And if your number is anywhere 6.5 and above, you're considered a type 2 diabetic. And and the important thing to notice there is, for every 1 point increase, so if you go from 5.7 to 6.7, for every 1 point increase, you increase your chances of dying by 21%, heart attack by 14%, amputation by 43%, kidney disease, vision loss, and nerve damage by 37%. And so if it went from 5.7, not to just 6.7, but 7.7, now you're more likely to die by 42%. You get the idea. Amputation by 86%. So every point that you can lower it, it will reduce your risk for both death and several terrible side effects that you could potentially have. Now, still talking about diagnosis, what do we see here?
An A1C test of 6.5 or higher.
That tells you have type 2 or potentially type 1, but we're sticking with type 2 for a moment.
A fasting plasma glucose test of 126.
Now, let me explain what that is. Basically, a fasting test is when you wake up in the morning. Any of you could do this. You could go to Walmart, you could go to CVS or some drugstore, and you could buy a blood glucose monitor. Basically, you'd go in there, you go on Amazon, you get for $30, it'll have 100 strips, and they'll have the little pokers where you push the button, it pokes your finger, you get a little drop of blood, you put it on the test strip, and if you wake up in the morning and you haven't eaten since the day before, and you wake up and it tells you your blood sugar is 126 or above, you're a diabetic. You will know that at that point. I've done this, tested it out myself. If you have an oral glucose tolerance test and it's 200, what does that mean? You'd go to a doctor. You could do it at home if you wanted to, but they make you drink a super sugary, nasty flavored drink. You have to drink this super sugary drink, and then you wait 2 hours, poke your finger, check your blood sugar, and if it's 200 or above, you're considered a diabetic. The next one, a random plasma glucose test of 200. That means if you ever poke your finger and you ever get the number 200, ever, morning, night, daytime, after meal, whatever, you're considered a diabetic. If it's ever 200 or above. So you may say, okay, well, you might think, well, I'm a pre-diabetic, not a diabetic. What are the dangers there?
If you have prediabetes, you have a 50% greater chance of having a heart attack or stroke than someone who doesn't. So it's still fairly significant, even though, your doctor might say, oh, you're a pre-diabetic, and you feel, oh, okay, I'm not a full-blown diabetic, but still 50% greater chance of a heart attack or stroke. That's pretty significant. How about some side effects of diabetes? So heart attacks, which my dad had, strokes, which my dad had, nerve damage, which he had, neuropathy, and hence why he had to get amputated. But we're going to show you a video about neuropathy, and this is just really exciting. We have
an entire video series that we made. This is just one night that we're talking about this, but we have a whole, I think, a 5-session series on diabetes if somebody wants to delve into it deeper. And here's a video clip from some of the medical professionals that we interviewed for this.
One of the difficult areas of diabetes is that people get what we call peripheral neuropathy.
Peripheral neuropathy is often a painful condition. It's like a pins and needles sensation that can be significantly painful enough that people are seeking pain medicines to try to control it.
Peripheral means out there at the ends, and so you see neuropathy. It's a pathy of the nerves. In other words, a disease of the nerves.
It's a complication of diabetes where the nerve actually loses its ability to send messages to the spinal cord, and they can't feel it.
And there's numbness and later on pain. The most common thing I hear from people with neuropathy is when it's getting in its advanced stages, my feet feel like I'm walking on razor blades, even when they're laying down.
And the most common reason in the Western world is diabetes and alcohol. Alcohol can also cause peripheral neuropathy. That is a condition that is thought to previously not been able to be reversed.
Now, if you talk to most people who manage diabetes, they'll say, we're going to try to manage your peripheral neuropathy, and we're really probably we can't reverse it, but we're going to slow it down, and we're going to try to make it not get worse. If people stay on this program, they can reverse their peripheral neuropathy.
The astonishing thing is you put people on a plant-based diet, using only plants for food sources and using them unrefined. Those are the two big issues. There's other smaller issues you can talk about that might have small effects, but if the food source is plants and if it's unrefined, those are the two big issues. How you cook it, whether you cook it, all kinds of other things you hear out there are very, very minor issues in comparison to simply it comes from plants and it's unrefined. And these people, 90% of them have complete relief from their neuropathy, complete relief. And often in a very short period of time. In fact, when we get a group of 30 or 40 people in our seminars, we do these reversing diabetes seminars, we find that almost everybody with neuropathy will say within 2 or 3 days, it's getting better.
I really like the reversing diabetes programs because I can really see results really fast. If I bring somebody in and try to get them to lose 200 pounds, I'm not going to see much in 2 days. I'm not going to see anything in 2 days probably. But in a diabetic, I can see dramatic changes in 2 days. We have an 18-day program where it's focused on lifestyle, people with heart disease and stroke and peripheral vascular disease, the diseases in diabetes, all of the diseases of Western lifestyle. We actually test their blood at the beginning of the program. We test them at the end, and the results are often stunning. I mean, like a 40% reduction in triglycerides, a 30 or 40% drop in their cholesterol. Their blood pressure across the board, the blood pressure drops while on medication. In fact, it's not uncommon that we'll take a lot of people off their medications while in the program because they don't need it anymore. And that's what's really amazing. This thing is really a paper tiger. It doesn't have to kill you. It can save you.
That's one of the things I love about type 2 diabetes is that it is so reversible. It is, yeah, it's a great thing to see. Not every disease is as easy to reverse as type 2 diabetes. But now I want to explain a bit how glucose and insulin work for a healthy person. So what happened when I ate lunch today? I'll explain in a person who doesn't have type 1 or type 2. We're going to talk about a healthy person. So now, before we talk about it, the Bible says, for the life of the flesh is in the what? Blood. Your life is in your blood. So this right here, here's the human body.
And isn't it interesting that today, a lot of times the way we diagnose diseases is through the blood. And isn't it just the life of the flesh is in the blood?
And we were told this thousands of years ago in the Bible. So right here, this, let's see if I can make it work. I don't know, the clicker's not working. Can you push the button? I don't know why it stopped working. There you go. That right there is the pancreas. Now, you wouldn't see it like this. If you open somebody up, your stomach would be covering it, but I put it on the front so you could actually see it. But that right there is the pancreas. And the pancreas, if I eat a meal, and what happens is I eat a meal, it'll have fats, proteins, and carbohydrates in it naturally. I don't mean I'm not adding fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. It's just naturally in food. And so your body begins to break them down. As it does, what it will do with some of the carbohydrates, so if you have an apple or an orange, it'll break some of those down and it will begin to send forth into the bloodstream some of the simple sugars as glucose. And in my situation, it's great because it gives me energy. I feel fantastic. Sugar is in its natural form, not refined sugar, not, this corn syrup type things, high fructose corn syrup. But we're talking about in apples, oranges, whole grains, these kinds of things. So what will happen is that my body begins to break it down, and it will send off the glucose into the blood vessels, and the body will realize, hey, the blood sugar is going up, and sugar or glucose is the main fuel for your cells. It's the main fuel for the cells. You can also burn fat, that's possible, but the main thing that is used in our body to give us energy, the main fuel, is simple glucose. And so as that's going through the blood vessels, what happens is the blood sugar goes into the blood vessels, and your cells want that sugar in them. They want the glucose in them, but the only way to get it in, you need a key to unlock the door of the cells. My wife and I, we lived in a motorhome for a few years, traveling, and it was a pretty big one. It was like 37 feet or something. And so they had a key. If you wanted to put fuel in, you needed a key to unlock it, because it's such a big tank that people might siphon off your gas. Mm-hmm. So too with your cells. In order to open the cell to put the fuel in the tank, you need a key, and the key is insulin. It's insulin. And when it goes in, it connects, it opens it up, then the glucose, the sugar, can go into the glucose channel, it gets into the cell, now that cell has energy, and now you have energy. Now I want to show you, this is a video I put together to give you an idea from a visual perspective of how it works. So this right here, this kind of flower-shaped thing here is insulin, and the white balls are glucose. So I've just eaten a meal. This is how it works for a normal person. I've just eaten a meal. Now, there's blood sugar there's glucose in the bloodstream, and so my pancreas sent out the keys. It sent out the insulin. It connects to the insulin receptor, and once it does that, it opens up the cell so that the sugar can get into the cell. Now I have energy. Now I feel good. So you got your pancreas. The pancreas produces the keys, produces the insulin, connects to the insulin receptor. The glucose can get in. Then you have energy.
Your muscle cells, your liver cells, all of these need that energy in them to function. So if the glucose is sitting in the bloodstream, what's it doing to your blood sugar level? Rising. It's not being utilized, and that's why you get so tired, because it's not getting into the cells where you need it. It's just flowing in the blood sugar, and then the body starts putting it in places it's not supposed to be.
But in a normal person, it doesn't get too high. In me, it doesn't get too high. I can eat, plenty of good carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables and grains. I don't get blood sugar problems. It's because my body's functioning properly. I'll show you why it doesn't, but perfect health depends upon perfect circulation. If your circulation is good, the glucose will get in the cells. You won't have high blood sugar. It won't damage your nerves. You won't have all the health issues. But now I want to tell you how glucose and insulin work for type 1 diabetics. So type 1s, their pancreas has been damaged. And now their pancreas is not producing insulin anymore. It's not producing keys anymore. So they eat the exact same meal that I would eat. And what happens is their blood sugar starts to go up. But as it goes up, the body says to the pancreas, hey, pancreas, make the keys, send out the insulin. But the trouble is, the pancreas has become damaged. The cells of the pancreas are damaged, so it can't produce any keys. So your blood sugar starts to go up. Notice what happens with our sugar. This is our blood sugar. They come to the cell, and what?
Can't get in.
They can't get in because it has not been unlocked by the insulin. They're not making insulin, or at least they're not making enough insulin. And so because their pancreas is damaged, there's no keys, the sugar can't get in. Ultimately, that person over a long period of time will die because they can't get the energy that they need for brain function, for their muscles. They're going to, so what do they have to do? They end up having to have insulin injected, can be through, or they'll have an insulin pump today, which is really handy that you can have it, a monitor, on your arm, and it can be pumped. You can have a pump on you so that you don't have to go through all the injections and so forth. But you have to somehow get in your body insulin if you're not making anymore. That's a type 1 diabetic. But that's only about less than 10% of people are type 1. The majority of diabetics, around 90% of diabetics, are type 2. So how does glucose and insulin work in a type 2 diabetic? So they eat the same meal that the type 1 ate, they eat the same meal that I ate, and what happens in them? Now, here's our video again.
And they don't have a problem with insulin or their pancreas.
Yes, their pancreas is not broken. The type 2 diabetic, initially, their pancreas is working fine. And so, but what happens in the type 2, their pancreas is working, but do you notice that this cell looks a little bit different? It's the same cell, but it's now more pink than red. And the reason in the illustration is because now the cells are coated with fat. And this idea, these cells become fatty. The researchers call it intramyocellular lipid. That means fat within the cells. So the fat has gotten in the cell, and because that, an illustration would be, imagine while you're here at this meeting, a prankster comes to your house, and they take bubble gum and they shove it in your keyhole. So you get home, and you got your key, and there's a keyhole, but it's all gummed up. It's going to be very difficult to open up the door because it's gummed up. Same thing happens within the cells. When you get a bunch of fat within the cells, what ends up happening is, you can see here in our video, it comes to connect, but it's not able to connect. The insulin doesn't connect well, so what happens? The sugar tries to get in, but it can't because the key didn't connect. So you know what your body does to compensate? It tells the pancreas, hey, that key didn't work, send out some more. So the pancreas of a type 2 diabetic is working harder than my pancreas is. My pancreas just sends it out. There's no blockage of the fats not coating the cells, and so the key comes, opens right up, lets the sugar in, I have energy, feel phenomenal. In the type 2, they send it out, doesn't work, send some more, and so they end up they send out more insulin, and the term that the researchers call that is they call that insulin resistance. Your cells are resisting the insulin's work, and so what ends up happening if the sugar can't get into the cell because the insulin is not connecting well, what happens to the blood sugar? The blood sugar goes up because it's not getting in the tank. It's not getting into the cells. Fadia, why don't you tell us about
insulin-degrading enzymes. These are really, really interesting. So it's called insulin-degrading enzymes. And what their normal job is to clean up the plaque in your brain. That's what they do. They go and they eat up that plaque, and that's a way to make sure you don't get Alzheimer's or strokes, okay? So that's what they do. But guess what happens? Sometimes they get called away from the work that they do. And how do you think that happens?
The term is insulin-degrading enzymes.
What happens is, let's say you eat something and your blood sugar spikes. Well, then what do you think the insulin does? The pancreas starts sending the insulin out. Come on, go over there and take care of this. But then it's too much. And so then you have a lot of insulin. So then what does the brain then say? Go take care of that extra insulin and eat it up. So
That's
those
the insulin
insulin-degrading enzymes will go take care of that spike in insulin instead of cleaning up the plaque. So you see how it's just not good to have that spike happen to you, or have a spike in your blood sugar, which then causes the spike in insulin.
And the other thing that can do it is by constant snacking. Snacking is a great way to make your pancreas be sending out tons and tons of keys.
Yeah.
So if you're snacking all the time, if you're eating, it's very popular today for people to say, oh, if you want to lose weight, eat 6 times a day. But the trouble with doing that is you're spiking your insulin over and over and over. It's actually better to eat less times a day and eat, larger meals, 2 to at most 3 times a day. It's even better if you're a type 2 to eat 2 times a day, breakfast and a late lunch, and be done for the day. You think, oh, I could never do that. In the beginning, it's hard, and then it becomes super easy. You don't even feel like eating in the evening, and your rest is just so much better. You feel so much better. You don't have to do that. I'm not forcing that on anybody, but the research shows, and that is a significant benefit in type 2 diabetics. We actually looked at that last week.
So something you want to do also, not just, like he said, the fat is what coats the cell, right? So you want to decrease the fat so you're not having these spikes in your insulin. Because everybody talks about, when you hear about diabetes, what do people tell you to stop eating? Carbs. Sugar. Stay away from the sugar. Guess what? Sugar is a symptom. So when you see that, say, this is a symptom. It's not the root cause. Remember, we started out talking, ascertain the cause, and then you can deal with the symptoms. So dealing with sugar is just a symptom. It's not actually dealing with the cause. The cause is the high-fat diet that we're doing today. And we don't think we're eating high-fat, but it really has increased quite a bit in the U.S., the amount of fat we eat. And so when it's getting clogged, then you're having high blood sugars, right? And then you say, oh, I shouldn't eat so much. But remember what he said, it causes insulin resistance, and it causes you to start having issues with dealing, like if you pulled back on the fat, you would take in all that glucose and have crazy energy. For example, he had gallbladder issues, and he had migraines.
And hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia, once again, means hyper means above, hypo means below. I had hypoglycemia, so I would, eat a meal, and then before lunch, my blood sugar would drop.
And he'd get hangry.
Hangry. You've heard of hangry?
Yeah.
Hanger. You get frustrated before the meal. I would have that. And then we changed to this diet where now, and we got on a low-fat diet. What did that do? The cells, if you go on a low-fat diet, the cells will burn up the fat. I wasn't super heavy or anything at the point, but still my cells were coated in fat. And so
was your gallbladder.
That's right. Right. That's gallstones are most often associated with high-fat diet.
So a doctor friend told him, we were staying with her, we were actually making that documentary where you seen some clips from. She said if Chad doesn't want to lose his gallbladder, he's got to go on a low-fat diet. And he's like,
and I was like, whatever, I'm not going to do. I'm a normal guy. Guys don't often want to change, And then, but this was great because we were recording her for a documentary film. We were recording her and 18 of her patients, how their life had been changed. And we were staying with her and her husband. And she said, hey, I'll cook for you for these 2 weeks. Just give it a try. Yeah. And I'm a guy. If you cook for me, I'll just eat it, right? That's the easiest thing to do. So I just ate her food. And within 3 days, my life was changed. All my gallbladder pain went away. My energy just went, I was 35 at the time. My energy just went through the roof. It was amazing. I felt like running all the time. If I had to go get something from the car out on the street, I would run to the car. And I would run back I just had so much energy I'd never experienced. Why? Why did I have so much energy? Because in those few days, those cells were burning off the fat. Now they didn't have gum in the keyhole. And so what would happen, my pancreas would send out the keys, crack that door right open, the sugar would come in, and boom, I had fantastic energy all the time. No more hangry, no more, blood sugar.
Hypoglycemia.
No more.
And then no more migraines, because he would get migraines from the hypoglycemia. So no more migraines as well. And it was all from one thing he had to eliminate out of his diet. Isn't that amazing?
By the way, now I know someone's probably thinking, but Chad, I've heard of people reversing type 2 diabetes with the keto diet, which is the exact opposite of what we're telling you. We're saying a low-fat diet. Keto diet says super high-fat diet. And it works. It works. Say, but Chad, that contradicts what you're saying. What the researchers have done is they've found that in about a year of being, someone goes on a super low carbohydrate diet, super high fat diet, they end up not having high blood sugar because they hardly eat any carbohydrates. So it works technically, but what the researchers have found, it works for about a year, and within about 2 years, they're back to being diabetic again. Because what's happening is, and the strange thing about it, they're still eating hardly any carbohydrates. They're hardly eating any carbs, yet they have high blood sugar. Because your body can actually create this within you. It can create the sugar within you when you're on this high-fat diet for a long time. At first, it's phenomenal. So within a few days on a keto diet, your blood sugar can normalize, and you'll say, hey, I'm not a diabetic anymore. This is phenomenal. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. But the trouble is that slowly it will begin to add that fat to the cells in the pancreas and in the liver and in the muscles. And so the diabetes in most cases will start to come back within a couple of years.
And it makes you more insulin resistant.
Yes, and it creates an insulin resistance because that high fat will slowly start to do what we're talking about, and that's creating that intramyocellular lipid, the fat within the cells. So,
one more thing I just want to add, in case somebody is or knows someone that's type 1 diabetic, there's these guys, have you heard of them, Mastering Diabetes?
Yeah, if someone's type 1.
It would be really good to connect with them because some doctors won't even take type 1 diabetics because they can be difficult to manage. And so these guys have
You can watch
really
they have a
resources.
YouTube channel called Mastering Diabetes. They have phenomenal work, not at fully reversing type 1, but helping stabilize blood sugar so that you don't have to go blind or have the neuropathy. So give an example
of how they dealt with their insulin resistance.
So they tried, both the guys who run it, Cyrus and a guy named Robbie or Bobby, they both became type 1 diabetics. And so a type 1, remember, their pancreas doesn't work. So they have to inject insulin. And so they did what everybody says to do, go on a keto diet or a super high fat diet. And it worked for a little bit. And then their blood sugar became just horrible, and they couldn't figure it out. And Cyrus himself, he was in university, he was going to school, and his blood sugar would be massively high. He said if you get to 200, you're a diabetic, and I think his was getting to like 400. And so massively high.
He's trying.
And he's super fit. The guy's just ripped. Like, you would think this guy is as healthy as can be because he was super fit. So you're like, well, he doesn't have blood, fat within the cells. But he was, because of this high-fat diet, even though he looked like he didn't have fat within his cells, he did. And so his blood sugar spiking, couldn't figure it out. He took his monitor, his glucose monitor, he checked it. He was doing everything he could, doing everything he was told to do. And it was like 400. He took it and he just threw it at the wall and just smashed the thing. He was like, there's nothing you can do to fix this. And then how did he reverse it? He went on a fruit diet for a while. You think, what, fruit? Fruit's full of sugar. Well, guess what happened? When he ate all that fruit, what happened to the fat in his cells? Well, the body burned it up. It burned up the fat. He started getting this amazing. Now, he doesn't just eat fruit, but they eat massive amounts of fruit. They don't eat sugary junk food, but they eat, whole grains, vegetables, these kinds of things, and tons of fruit. And it reversed the insulin resistance. And so now he can eat tons of carbohydrates in their natural form, not refined, and keeping fantastic blood sugar by only injecting a tiny bit of insulin. Just a tiny bit of insulin. So that's a blessing
too, because insulin causes issues in the long run.
Insulin can cause weight gain.
Yeah.
So.
But how is it, do you remember the ratios? like what they were before?
I think he was giving one unit of insulin for maybe 30 carbs. No. He was giving one unit for one carbohydrate. So he's hardly eating carbohydrates. 1 unit to 1 carb when he was keto or when he was high fat. But then when he switched to the unrefined plants, he went to 1 unit to 30 grams, meaning his insulin resistance was way down. His cells were just soaking up the glucose, and the insulin was working very well. So they coach people. Yes, you can watch on, if you have type 1 or know somebody that does, Mastering Diabetes. They have a New York Times best-selling book also that I bought, and it's a fantastic book. So now I want to tell you some fascinating studies here. These are certain countries of the world have populations historically that were largely atherosclerosis-free. That means a hardening of the arteries, the number 1 killer in the United States. There were a number of cultures in the world that had rates near 0. Like you almost can't find someone with heart disease historically there. So this is way too small. I'm sorry. I should have made this bigger. The Bantus in Africa who lived on a 10% fat diet have historically had heart disease rates near 0. It's interesting when you look at a bunch of the historical African cultures, you see in Africa some of the healthiest people historically near 0 rates of heart disease. New Guinea, where they ate also 10% fat diet. Of 600 autopsies, only 1 person died from heart disease, and it's our number 1 killer here. And there it's less than 1%, less than 1% of people. In an area of Ecuador, 800 people studied that ate mainly a whole plant-based diet with 1 serving a week of animal protein, also had heart disease rates near 0. They studied 25 different populations on low-fat diets, and they had low levels of heart disease. But there was a man by the name of Nathan Pritikin, and this study in the Journal of Applied Nutrition. And 38 men in this particular study that they did, 38 men with advanced hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, average age of 60, they put them into 2 groups, so much so that most could not walk. These guys, their arteries were so clogged that most could not walk on a treadmill faster than 1.5 miles. Slow walk, 1.5 miles without pain, per hour rather, without pain stopping them. And angiograms showed clogging of the arteries even after they had already had bypass surgeries. The control group and the experimental group were both told to walk daily and try to stop smoking, but the control group would not change their diet. They would stay on their same diet. The experimental group ate the diet of atherosclerosis-free populations. These populations of the world that didn't have heart disease, they would go on an 80% carbohydrate diet and 10% fat. You think, what? All those carbs? That's a ton of carbs. It is. And you look at cultures historically around the world with near 0 levels of heart disease would eat, many of them, around 80% of their diet would be carbohydrate. And so, once again, what does that mean? That doesn't mean they were eating candy bars and cookies and cake and those kind of things. That means they were eating fruits, grains, nuts, these kinds of things, vegetables. So what ended up happening in this study? The results, in 2 weeks, the cholesterol was down on average 30%. That's just 2 weeks of changing the diet. An individual had his triglycerides drop from 360 all the way down to 85. 5 weeks on the treadmill, their skill increased by 800%. And 9 of the men who were hypertensives, had high blood pressure, when the study began, were off all of their medication, and they were not hypertensive within 5 weeks. So people with high blood pressure, most of them can fully reverse it in a few weeks. Most people can fully reverse it in a few weeks. And 4 of the subjects were diabetics to begin with, 2 of which were on insulin. Within 6 weeks, all of them were off all of their drugs and insulin because they didn't need it anymore. And this is normal. What we're talking about here, it is common. They see this all the time at these health centers, like the one I just went to, Uchee Pines up in Alabama there, or Weimar out in California, or the Black Hills Health Education Center in South Dakota, all over. We see this. These are just the most normal things to see people reversing type 2 diabetes within weeks, typically. So let's delve a little deeper. Here's a study by H.S. Sweeney a study in the Archives of Internal Medicine. This is fascinating. Medical students were put on 4 different diets: a high-fat diet, a high-carb diet, a high-protein diet, or fasting. And 2 days later, they did a glucose tolerance test. Once again, to explain what that is, that you eat a meal, or you drink a very sugary drink, and 2 hours later, they test your blood sugar, and if it's high, you're a diabetic. So they only put them on the super high-fat diet, high-protein diet, high-carb diet for just 2 days. And what happened? The high-protein diet became pre-diabetic within 2 days. You can turn someone into a pre-diabetic in 2 days by putting them on a very high-protein diet. Yeah, that is kind of scary. Mm-hmm. The high-fat diet, these are healthy college students, became diabetic within 2 days of eating a very high-fat diet. That's interesting. It's not very nice to hear. The high-carbohydrate group was completely normal on a very high-carbohydrate diet. That is fascinating. Now, why would that be? This makes sense with what we've been talking about. That the high fat can coat the cells, so then when you add the sugar back into the diet, the blood sugar spikes because the sugar can't get in the cells because the keyhole is gummed up and the insulin cannot get in. Is this making sense? Hopefully it is. So here's another study by J.W. Anderson in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. They put people on 2 diets. I'm not suggesting these diets, but this is fascinating. They put people, one group was on a 5% super low fat diet and 80% table sugar. Imagine you come to the doctor and they make you shovel just spoonful after spoonful all day into your mouth. That would be disgusting. Don't do this. I'm not suggesting it. But what did they find? The other group, they would give them 65% oil, 65% fat diet with oil, and 20% sugar. What happened? After 2 weeks, the high-fat group was considered diabetic. The 5% group continued, can you imagine? They were torturing them. The 5% group continued the diet of almost pure sugar for 7 weeks, and they still couldn't get high blood sugar in these people. Now, once again, do not go home and say, I went to some conference and the guy told me, go home and eat pure sugar and you'll reverse diabetes. The fact is, you probably would reverse your diabetes by doing that, but it would be a horrible diet to live by. Mm-hmm. It would be horrible to live like that, not only flavor-wise, but there's no nutrition in that, right? It's just pure carbohydrate without vitamins and minerals and all that, right?
And you would get protein deficiency.
Yes, you would get a protein deficiency because there's no protein in pure sugar. So do not go on that diet. I'm not promoting that. It's just, the proof is in the pudding, though. You can almost not turn a human into a diabetic by feeding them pure sugar. Sugar is what my wife said. It is the, what was the word?
Symptom.
Symptom of the disease. It doesn't cause the disease. Something else is causing the disease, and that is
the fat.
The fat, right? Fat covering the cells, so the glucose, somebody stuck bubble gum in the keyhole, right? So how about a lower fat diet? Here's 80 insulin-dependent patients, people who had to inject insulin. They put them on a 12% fat diet. Less than 5 months later, 72% of them were off insulin, and the bulk of the others had lowered theirs. So very low fat diets.
These are type 2 diabetics.
What's that?
These are type 2.
Yeah, these are type 2 diabetics. So they were able to get off their insulin. Now, just to let you know, one of the foods, I know if you go online, one of the greatest marketers of the last few years is a doctor named Dr. Gundry. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Gundry is a mixture of a few really good things and some real rubbish, according to the research. One of the new things he's saying is, one of the reasons certain cultures of the world live so long is because they smoke cigarettes. It's one of the things that he's preaching these days. And one of these doctors is interviewing.
And if you buy my cigarettes, they'll be the best.
Yeah. One of the doctors is interviewing him, and he's like, "You've got to be kidding me." He's like, "No, that's one of the reasons people live so long, because it has antioxidants." And it's true. It does have antioxidants because it comes from a plant. Every plant has some benefits for you, but the idea that smoking cigarettes is beneficial to longevity is ludicrous. So once again, Gundry has some halfway decent things to say. The other thing he says is one of the worst things a human could eat is beans. Because beans, he says, have lectins, which he's right, they do have lectins. And high amounts of lectins in your diet are actually not good. But do you know how to get rid of the high levels of lectins in beans? Cooking them.
Very well.
Does anybody eat raw beans, raw dry beans? Nobody. So it's like he found out this secret, but the secret is silly because nobody eats raw beans.
Because of science.
And we're not talking about like a raw green bean off the plant. We're not talking about that. Once it dries out, the lectins are in there. And strangely enough, research actually shows that people who do eat plants with lectins in them have lower levels of cancer. And what they also found is when they look around the world at, you may have heard of the group of people they call the blue zones. It's the areas of the world where people live the longest and the healthiest. There's almost only one correlation with every single blue zone, other than they're all somewhat of exercisers. It doesn't mean they're lifting a bunch of weights. It means they garden, or it's just they're active in their normal life. They're not marathon runners. They're just active in their daily life. But otherwise, dietarily, the one common thing that all of them have in common is that they are all bean eaters. The idea that he shares that is simply not true. And by the way, one of the best foods for lowering your blood sugar levels is beans, cooked beans. If you really struggle with blood sugar issues, eating beans with every single meal is a very beneficial thing. And by the way, there's many Hispanic people in southern Florida, right? And in the Caribbean down further. And what do they often eat with every single meal?
Rice and beans.
Rice and beans, right? That's just a common thing for them to do. And the beans stabilize blood sugar because they're very high fiber content, and that helps lower the blood sugar
They slowly
spikes.
release.
Yes, they slow the release of the glucose, and as a result, you don't have the high spike. So we spent time at the Black Hills Health and Education Center in South Dakota, and their patients with diabetes, every single meal you get some beans with the meal. And for some, you feel like, oh, that's strange, but for others, that's normal. That's just life. One of the things you can do to lower your blood sugar after a meal is going for a walk immediately upon finishing the meal. So if you finish your meal and you go for a walk immediately, we're not talking about going for a run, but just going for a walk, for every minute you walk after a meal, it can bring your blood sugar down by 1 to 3 points. So that means if you eat a meal and you immediately go for a walk for 15, let's say just 10 minutes, 10-minute walk, you're going to drop your blood sugar anywhere from 10 to 30 points. So that's going to keep your blood sugar from spiking into that pre-diabetic or that diabetic zone, or at least make it less likely to do it. You want to change the diet to get it to the point where it's really levels off. But this is something, one of the especially if you're not working, or even if you are working and you're able to eat while you're sitting there, and then when you're done eating, if you can go for a little walk right after your lunch, that is one of the best things you can do to help stabilize blood sugar and not have those spikes.
And it helps with the whole insulin degrading enzyme.
Yes, and it can help with the insulin degrading enzyme, because if the blood sugar doesn't spike, then the insulin doesn't have to spike as much. And because the insulin doesn't spike as much, then your body doesn't have to send those insulin degrading enzymes to break down the insulin. So it can keep doing its work of what? Cleaning the brain, right? Cleaning the plaque in the brain.
So walking after every
meal.
So
walking after every meal is one of the best things you can do. But I want to talk a little bit more about Alzheimer's for a moment. Research in the Journal of the American Medical Association Neurology reveals that exercise can lower the burden of beta amyloid, that's that plaque that is in the brain, and lessen gray matter volume loss. Once again, I showed that picture where the brain was deteriorating, that brain atrophy. So exercise can lower the amount of the plaques in the brain, and it can lower the amount of the shrinkage of the brain, the atrophy that you may have as you get older. In other words, exercise may lower the age-related shrinkage of the brain and may help lessen memory loss. So is exercise important? Mm-hmm. And by the way, if you go on this diet that we're talking about, I'll show you a video in a minute. It can begin to... If you go on the diet, you will start having energy and feeling like walking. You will feel like it. You don't just have to force yourself. You will start feeling like doing it. Now, Dale Bredesen, He's one of the men who showed that you could reverse Alzheimer's. Fascinating research, but he suggests 5 to 10 hours of exercise, or 2.5 to 5 hours of vigorous exercise weekly. So getting vigorous and getting several hours a week, if you're starting, I mean, it'd be good for everybody, but if somebody's starting to get dementia, you want to make an effort of doing a lot of exercise. And the trouble is, if somebody has, their dementia has progressed a bit, they generally don't want to exercise. Mm-hmm. So one of the Dr. Wes Youngberg, he shares in his book how he was helping people reverse dementia and Alzheimer's. And this wife, she came down with Alzheimer's. And so the husband knew one of the things he had to do is he had to get her exercising every single day. They had to go for their walks. They had to do it. But when you have dementia, you often don't feel like it. So he said, well, let's go for a walk. And she'd say no. And then he thought, how can I coax her to do it without forcing her? And he thought, I know she loves going to the mall. So he'd say, hey, you want to go to the mall? Oh, sure. And so that was every day. Every day he would just tell her, let's go to the mall. And oh, yeah, let's go. And then they would go walking at the mall. So find a way to make it happen. Yes, ma'am.
I read that your brain needs to have sufficient oxygen in order to operate.
Yes.
Properly. So this one person said they lay down on the floor every day and put their legs straight up for 20 minutes every night to get more oxygen to the brain. Do you think that's beneficial or not?
That's a good question. I do not know. I have not looked to see if there is a research study on that per se. It is possible. I do not know. I can't give you a definitive answer on that one.
As far as oxygen in the brain, yeah, you were talking about sleep apnea.
Yes, yes, oxygen on the brain. That much I know. Yes, you do want adequate oxygen. Whether or not that will raise the blood oxygen levels, I'm not 100% sure. We do know that exercise will. Another thing that has been shown to increase oxygen levels to the brain specifically is nasal breathing, not breathing through your mouth. And I have been practicing this. My next video on YouTube will be the research on the benefits of nasal breathing rather than mouth. I've been a mouth breather my whole life until about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I can tell you, I already feel different. And so I breathe through, I always had a stuffed up nose, but I've found ways to not have a stuffed up nose without drugs or Afrin or without that kind of stuff. And my last video talked a little bit about how to clear the nose out. But so yeah, something to consider is nasal breathing. And like we said, with sleep apnea, that is extremely important. Find a way to use your CPAP if you have sleep apnea. Even if it's annoying, find a way, and you'll get used to it after a while. It's going to be annoying for several days. My dad had that. He hated it. He couldn't handle it. He complained about it. But finally, he realized, wow, it works. And now he's used to it, and it's just part of life. So one other thing to do, we're almost done. Green leafy vegetables. Research in the journal Neurology reveals that one serving of green leafy veggies, things like spinach, kale, etc., lower the memory loss associated with cognitive decline. So getting some regular, find a way to enjoy it. There's different ways you could find to enjoy it. To me, I don't like raw kale, but cooked kale I do like. I actually like cooked kale. So find a way to make it so you can enjoy it. And maybe you don't like that. Maybe you like spinach better or something.
Same with blueberries and pomegranates. They do the
Yep,
same
there is
thing.
some research on blueberries and pomegranates also being beneficial. So, eating regular blueberries, pomegranates, they're only around sometimes a year. But the research was actually on pomegranate juice. And you can buy that. You may have seen Palm, these little kind of two bubbles. You can buy it. I haven't seen it here yet in Florida, but I know up north we have it regularly. Palm, you probably have.
Yeah,
Has anybody
they
ever
have
seen
it.
Palm down here?
Yeah,
okay,
they
it's
have
down
it.
here. I figure. Okay, so it's here. So I want to share with you a video clip of this fellow who came to our seminar in Oregon. This man, type 2 diabetic, and overweight, neuropathy, the terrible pain in the feet, and I'll let you hear his story of what happened within 2.5 weeks.
I've been diagnosed as a diabetic for a little over 20 years. And because of my family background, all 4 grandparents were diabetic. Mom and dad were diabetic. My brother, who passed away a few years ago of diabetic complications, is diabetic. And so with that history, I would be extreme chance for being dead by the age of 40. My side effects were mostly neuropathies. The neuropathy is a feeling you get. It's comes from within the nerve system, deteriorating due to the blood sugar situation. And mine was numbness in my feet. My feet, half of both feet were always numb, and sometimes even back as far as my heel coming up toward my ankle on some days, but always half a foot. At night, periodically, the rubbing of my feet on the sheets would feel like they were being rubbed on a red hot iron, just like they were being blistered. I'd have to put my feet out from under the covers and over the edge of the bed so they weren't touching anything. But the numbness never went away, day or night. I started this therapeutic diet idea before I knew it was therapeutic diet. About a week or maybe two before I met Chad and was introduced to the therapeutic diet concept, I had started adding more fruit, fresh fruit, and more fresh vegetables to an already vegetarian diet. But I was lacto-ovo. That's milk and eggs and cheese vegetarian. We went to the brain-gut connection and got a hold of the recipe book and started some real changes. And within 3 days, the numbness was progressing out of my feet. Within a week, I was down to where I just had 2 toes on each foot that were numb 24/7. And then a few more days, that went where I could have feeling on the tops of all my feet, all my toes, all my foot. Another day went by, it was down to 1 toe next to the big one. The second toe on both feet were the only numbs. Then that went down to where it was down to just 1 toe. And now the numbness has gone out of all toes and feet. I have a little bit of residual, kind of a fluffy, fuzzy feeling in the left second toe. But basically, I could say it's 99.9% gone.